Greetings, AP Lit students. I hope you are all well. This little presentation of mine will serve as kind of a final tune-up to prepare you for the AP Lit exam, which is on May 13th. As you have heard, it will consist of one 45-minute essay. That essay will be the prose passage essay. So you have already read the prompt, read the passage, and responded with an essay that you submitted to Schoology. What I want to do now is spend some time, two different videos, one explicating the passage and the prompt thoroughly and well, with some notes that I took to just show you how the note-taking process can occur. I also then want to give you an additional video that will explicate and discuss a high-scoring student sample. So we're going to look at a lot of different things here in the next 30 or so minutes. So buckle up and let's analyze. So the passage that you read and responded to is an excerpt from Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, written in 1886. So the first thing I want to do is show you some notes that I took on just that fact. So a couple of things. The prompt tells us that Thomas Hardy is our author. The Mayor of Casterbridge is a novel, which means you will underline it when you write about it. 1886 puts us in Victorian England, which the 1850 to 1900 is the Victorian genre. Not that you need to know that, but it helps. The Victorian elements that you can consider when discussing a Victorian passage, invariably, there will be an emphasis on proper behavior, propriety, modesty, and the good old class distinctions that are very defined and observed. And that is very true in this passage as well. Another thing I wanted to point out is, Victorian prose, which is the prose of the late 19th century, is long, syntactically complex sentences. But these are to your advantage. I know they might be difficult for a modern reader, but they definitely offer lots of proper detail and characterization. So they paint a picture very well for you. But another thing that you may definitely expect is that the vocabulary is of a higher register. So as you read these words, if diction is something you focus on, you're going to look for trends in connotation. Do the words tend to go in a direction of negativity, positivity, etc.? So let me minimize those notes real quick. Now, let's take a look at the prompt. Michael Henchard and his daughter, Elizabeth Jane, are reunited after years of estrangement. I want to point out that the prompt typically has some very important information regarding the situation of the prompt, or of the passage, rather. Here you have a father and a daughter, and they have been reunited after years of estrangement, which means they were separated for a long time. Now, there's a lot of possibilities as to what caused that estrangement, but you know that there's probably going to be some excitement, some nervousness, some maybe, just reservation about all this. So already you're starting to get a sense of what these two characters are going to be dealing with. During this separation, Henchard has risen from poor seasonal farm worker to wealthy mayor of a small country town. So he's climbed from a lower class to an higher class, which is a big Victorian element. It doesn't happen often, but the fact that Henchard has done that is, very impressive. While Elizabeth has supported herself by waiting on tables at a tavern, she has not risen. And for a woman to be working in a tavern, no doubt she subjects herself to a lot of probably mistreatment, and definitely isn't of, any kind of polished class, like she's probably uneducated, etc. So already we have a lot of information here. I want to bring up my notes again just to point out some things here. So our context is set. We have father, daughter, reunited after years of estrangement. He went from poor farmer to wealthy mayor. She is a waitress. Just wanted to point that out, that these notes can be helpful. All right, moving on. Let's read the actual task. Read the passage carefully, paying particular attention to tone, word choice, and selection of detail. Compose a well-written essay in which you analyze Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship between the two characters. This is where I want to point out that 98% of the time that I've ever seen this prose prompt come out, it always deals with characterization, particularly characterization or the interaction between two characters. So this whole complex relationship between the two characters is something you need to be ready to do. Now, the prompt tells you that tone, word choice, and selection of detail are what you should pay particular attention to. You could, and you probably should, but do not in any way feel like those are the only three literary devices that you can use to discuss the complex relationship between the two characters. Word choice is diction, and if you go with that, obviously you're looking for trends in connotation, meaning what words seem to be used to characterize certain aspects of each character. Be precise when talking about word choice or diction. Do not just say the diction says this. Always say it seems to indicate maybe a diction that is empowering or shows a very saddened or melancholy type of phenomenon, etc. So be precise with your word choice. Word choice then leads to tone, and tone's a good one to discuss. You can always do the diction-tone combo, or you can use tone if there's contrast. You can talk of the different contrasting tones of each character. Selection of detail is kind of vague, I understand, but typically what selection of detail means, and it's an empowering device to use because it is so vague, you can use it to describe imagery that is set forth in the passage, or it even just is there'll be chunks of characterization that this passage provides, and I'll show you that. And so selection of detail is a nice umbrella if you want to use it. So let me bring up my notes really quickly to show you that I did put right here, pay particular attention to tone, word choice, and selection of detail. But some of the other literary devices that you might want to use are dialogue. These passages contain dialogue or interchange between two characters. That can be used, obviously, to show the complex relationship between the characters. Point of view, if it's a first-person point of view, that says a lot about how a character is characterized. If it's a third-person point of view, which this passage is, I'll point out something about it. And oftentimes you can use irony. But the main thing, at the end of the day, is you have to show how certain literary devices analyze Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship between Michael and Elizabeth Jane. Now, when you are discussing this complex relationship, don't merely state that it is a complex relationship. State how it's a complex relationship, that there's ambivalence there, that there's mixed feelings, that it shows that, yes, they love each other, but he is hard on her because he's risen and she has not, etc. So spell out that complex relationship in specific. Be precise with your language whenever you're discussing this relationship. All right. So then the next thing I wanted to do, and I'm not going to read the passage to you at this time because you've read it and already written on it, but it does go on to a second page here. So what I instead want to do is show you the notes that I took as I read, okay? So the first thing I did is I made two columns, and what I did is I made Michael, the character, on the left and Elizabeth Jane on the right. And I went through and I looked at certain words as he is being characterized. And words like ardor, which means like full of love, but agitation, being bothered. It shows that he's a passionate man, but it seems like his passion's a little bit kind of almost not truly full of love, but maybe just some nervousness because they've been estranged for a while. But then it shifts quickly to being constrained, which means he kind of pulls back. And that's evident in this first paragraph. Right in here, he has agitation and affection, but then it goes to constrained. And then from that constraint, he goes to coldness. And that coldness then goes to chiding, which means like accusatory. So already these words, this diction, this word choice is showing a trend to help characterize Michael as, yes, he's passionate, but more so he's cold towards his daughter that he hasn't seen in a long time. And so then you get that idea, sorry. And then, so continuing on to some of the other words that characterize Michael, he gives a sharp reprimand, which means he's kind of bossy, and through his coldness and his chiding, he becomes bossy. The word peremptorily was used, which is kind of a word that implies he's dictatorial towards her. But the interesting thing, and he reddens at the shame at Elizabeth, he's ashamed of her. So these things show that he is definitely not pleased with his daughter, and he's not full of love, and he's not rejoicing at their reunion. But what we begin to see is that he is a hypocrite, right? He starts to chide her for her lowliness. And really, he was low once. And now that he's high, he seems to kind of want to nitpick her lowliness as if he has moved beyond it, which we know just, it's not cool to deny your humble origins. So then we get over here to Elizabeth Jane, and the one thing, she's described more fully. So this is where I say, yes, it's third-person narration, but Elizabeth is characterized with more nuance and with more selection of detail. So there's sections where it just really shows who she is. One of the things shows that she is she uses lowly dialect. She's used to working in a tavern with very uneducated men. So her father kind of picks at her for that. So she begins to adjust her lowly dialect and goes from using, colloquial country words to more refined words just to impress her dad. Words like shame and sadness and lowliness and humility, she adjusts her speech. One thing that is stated is that she reads a lot, which is not something we'd expect, but that means that she is definitely low, but trying to maybe overcome her position or has the capacity to do so. She's considerate, and she has this considerate disposition, but because she's so considerate, it seems to put her in a disadvantage in the eyes of her father. She's always saying thank you, even to lowly people, and that drives her father crazy. She shrank visibly, which shows that she's kind of this meek, humble, gentle person who just is so overrun by kind of a bully of a father, right? And he has really no place to be that way. So that's kind of the words. That's kind of the characterization. Tone, I think that the words kind of convey that tone. But let me go ahead and bring up the passage one more time just to show you the selection of detail where there are whole paragraphs, her handwriting, her considerate disposition in here, her talk. So this selection of detail, these whole paragraphs kind of serve as that selection of detail to help characterize our poor Elizabeth Jane. A little bit more here with her domestic expositions. But what I will say is this. I think if we could easily write on diction and tone and selection of detail. You don't need to do all three, but I think that if you did word choice and a combination of word choice and tone, and then as its own body paragraph, and then a body paragraph on selection of detail, you'd have plenty to discuss. Where the gist of the whole passage occurs is in the final paragraph. In this final paragraph here, not only does it kind of give us some more selection of detail, but it shows that these protruding needle rocks show the complex relationship. It shows that Michael has passion, but more coldness. And it's the coldness towards Elizabeth that makes her feel so sad and feels like that he doesn't like her. And the more she tries to impress him, the less he likes her, and the more she seems estranged to him. And so this last paragraph is the whole gist of that complex relationship. So let me bring up my notes one more time. And I said this in my notes, that the final paragraph of the passage is the crux. Michael's passion and his coldness are those protruding needle rocks. And it equals Elizabeth's terror. The word terror is used, like she's afraid of him. She's afraid of his coldness and his passion. But it's the coldness that seems to grow to dislike. And ironically, the more interesting that her appearance and manners become, the more she seemed too strange to him. So she's trying really hard. The more she tries, the less he seems to like her.